Hey everybody, you are back checking out 5 Things That It Did Right, the show, and we're using show liberally here, where we take a look at 5 things that a video game did just absolutely stunningly well. Now this show is secretly also a review in disguise, so this is part 1 of our review of Infamous. Be sure to check back in the future, we're going to be putting up part 2, 5 Things Infamous Did Wrong, very soon. And hey, if you enjoy what you see here, the real subscribe button is now the bell that shows up next to subscribe when you click subscribe, and clicking all for notifications so that you actually see when we upload here, because YouTube, it's gotten really weird in the last couple of years. But without further ado, let's jump right into the 5 things that Infamous did very well. The first thing we have here are the powers. These are all electricity based, at least in Infamous 1, and that sort of branches off later in the series, which we'll be taking a look at in the future. But the thing with the electricity powers is that they are not overused in other games, which is the first benefit to them, because there are a lot of games that seem to rely on the same superpowers over and over. This is not something we see a lot, and secondly, there are very clever uses of these powers in the game. Now, it comes down to small details. The details are so special. The fact even that Cole, the main character you play as, can walk and stand in a puddle, and that puddle will become electrified just from him standing there, and enemies walking into the puddle will get fried by electricity without you doing anything. This is just Cole standing in a puddle. That's a small detail that you have to appreciate, I think. On top of that, the game also has pretty pinpoint electrical ranged attacks. The combat could use some work, but overall the powers themselves are very creative and well implemented. There's also a variety of them. It's not just zappy zap and that's it. There's shock grenades. There's pinpoint accuracy shots that slow down time. There's normal electrical shots. There's electric punches. You know, there's a lot going on here. An electric shield. This isn't just a one power hero, and it shines through the whole game. It lets you play the game more how you want to. Do you want to launch homing electrical rockets at an enemy? Do you want to throw just a ton of grenades at them until they go boom? Or do you want to take the time to pinpoint accuracy headshot everybody in the area before moving on? It's totally up to you, and that's just another thing that makes the electrical powers so entertaining and well implemented. The second element that this game did so well was the karmic system. If you've played Fallout, especially 3 and New Vegas, and obviously the classics, but those are the ones we can go to for the newer generation of gamers, you know what a karma system is. But for those of you who might be new to this idea, since not a lot of games actually implement it, a karmic system is essentially the idea that you do good things, you're a good person. You do bad things, you're a bad person.
Bet if I fry a couple people in the crowd, the rest will run away. The food will be all ours, but some of these guys might starve.
I got one open. Let's eat.
There's a lot of games that don't really go down this road and are more morally gray, just like real life. But there is something exceedingly entertaining about the ideas of the karmic system. The fact that you can play as Cole, and your version of Cole can either be a paragon of goodness and truth, you're basically electric Superman, or you're a total sleazebag, scumball, who just completely obliterates everything in his path and kills civilians and attacks police and attacks gang members indiscriminately, will drain actual human beings of their electrical energy to recharge instead of trying to find a mechanical way to do so. I mean, these are very different characters that you're playing as depending on what you do. It's also very entertaining because even though there is not a masterfully crafted difference in the first game, and it gets better as the games go on, there is a difference in how the story plays out. There are key story elements that will change depending on what type of person you are.
Yeah, well, I'm not like you. No. It took me a while, but I finally realized that this isn't about me, about what I want. Not anymore. It's about keeping this city safe. And Once you're dead, no one will ever threaten it again. For the longest time, I wanted nothing more than to get out of this city, leave it to rot. But when I was staring at the race sphere, I realized that there's no reason for me to leave. This is my city now. I control every inch of it, and no one is going to stand in my way.
It's not just the world around you, essentially, or how Cole looks, although Cole's look does change with your karma, but it's also the story itself. It essentially comes down to who you want to be at the end of the game, and not just who you know that you are, but who the game knows that you are too. How your actions have impacted other people in the world, and even how people in the world respond to you. If you're good enough, people will praise you. People will be happy with you. They'll be inspired to see you. If you're evil enough, crowds will meet you by throwing stones at you or fleeing in terror at the sight of you. And while the crowds definitely need some work in this game, and that would go into the series as it went on, the fact that there is this interaction between Cole and the world that he lives in is something special. It's something that I'm very positive that other game developers saw and built off of, especially because that's sort of a gold standard now in games. If you want your world to feel alive, if you want to have a massive open world and you want it to feel like special and like there's player agency in it, there has to be interaction between the character and the world. It can't just be a static backdrop. And this is one of the earlier games I can think of that really started tackling that problem in an interesting way. The third thing that this game does so well is the personality. And I know, Jay, you always say everything has personality and it's unique. Unique is a buzzword I overuse. But what do I mean by it in this case? The game is so comic booky. It's comic styled. Not just in the design of the superhero, not just in the cartoony character design, which is special in and of itself, but also in the art and cutscenes. I mean, the fact that there are all of these cutscenes in game that actually are drawn and will animate in a 2D moving style as it goes on. It looks like a motion comic. It's really beautiful. And if you look up infamous wallpapers, a lot of the images you're going to see, at least categorized and archived on websites, are going to be images from these artistic drawings and these artistic cutscenes. I mean, these add so much more cutscenes than the normal voice synced cutscenes in the game, which we'll definitely get into in 5 things it did wrong, but it really did impress me. Like, the fact that this holds up so well and has such an established feel for something that is its own unique property. Like, you have to understand, Infamous is not a comic book game. Infamous is not Ultimate Spider-Man, where it had all of this unique artistic renderings of Spider-Man and all of this source material for a story to go off of. Infamous was a created IP, but they made it feel like it fit in the overall superhero comic genre that's been blowing up ever since the early 2000s, and there's no end in sight to. This was its own thing that managed to fit into that wider spectrum without source material. And that's hard to do. Very few times do a piece of art come along that is able to encapsulate that genre so well without having source material. The only things I can really think of that match this are actually in the movie realm with something like Unbreakable or Split, and that fits so well into the age of superheroes and comic books as well without having a source material. This just isn't something you see that often. I suppose The Crow is another example, but it's definitely impressive and worth calling out when we do see it. The fourth awesome thing that Infamous does is the climbing system. This is one I had to put in perspective of the time it came out, because I always balance criticisms and praise with basically looking at it today and in the past. Like, how did this function when it came out? How does it hold up to what is out there now? If you are to take the traversal system in general and compare it to what's out there now, it's very dated. It definitely needed work if you were to remaster this game, because jumping up buildings is a lot of tapping X basically to get to the next platform or finding a ledge. In the context of when this came out though, it's incredibly impressive. I mean, the only climbing system I can think of on par with this, and it was doing it a little better, was Assassin's Creed. most other games were not. I guess Spider-Man 2 and 3, the movie games, were sort of doing this, but it was a totally different type of game. This is a much more grounded movement system. It's very impressive verticality, and the traversal in general is done well. And it's even creative on its own. I mean, the fact that you can grind on an electrical subway rail, because that's how it would work. I mean, you can glide on metal, like with electricity, it travels along metal and that's your power. Or the fact that Cole can grind along power lines. It actually sort of pulled in elements of a Tony Hawk feeling to this game. Totally different, but interesting nonetheless. And it adds that sense of style to your movement. The fact that you are parkouring around the city and jumping off of buildings and doing all of these special moves, it made you feel really cool. And that's definitely something in a superhero game that can't be undersold, because at the end of the day, the people playing superhero games, yeah, they want to be a good guy, or in this case, maybe a bad guy. They want to live out that fantasy, but they want to feel really cool. They want to feel like a superhero and feel like someone traveling through that city. And you definitely feel that way in Infamous. The final thing that's really impressive to me was the story itself. And we've already covered some of those elements in bits and pieces throughout this, like comparing it to other original IPs that fit in with comic books like The Crow, the M. Night Shyamalan Unbreakable films. But it's not just that it fits into the comic book realm, it's also just a good story. There's a lot of good world building that goes on throughout the game. There's a lot of connecting to background elements. The fact that you have a superhero game that's also about a corrupt government sort of spinning a story in line to keep things under control. And you have so many science fiction elements, not just in the superpowers, but also in the context of who the main villain is, how everything plays out. It's really impressive. I honestly couldn't believe that this was so good for an original IP, because I don't expect superhero games to be this well thought out, usually. I mean, you have to admit that before something like the Batman Arkham series, which again has been a core focus on this channel, there weren't a lot of great superhero games. And that was with all this source material to build off of. So this game really does go in depth in its world, its story, and its character development. And while some of those characters are not likable, and we'll cover that in things it did wrong, the main character is extremely likable. You're always rooting for him. It becomes a little harder when you play on evil, but even then you feel just awesome. And it's just impressive. I mean, I went back to replay this just last week on the PS3, and I forget a lot of times when I'm playing it that I'm playing the PS3, because it's just so wow. I don't know how else to put it than that. So hey, these are the 5 things that I think Infamous did so well. It did them so right, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Definitely check back on part 2 to see the 5 things that Infamous did wrong, in my opinion, and share with me in the comments down below what you think about this list. Are there other things that you love about the first Infamous game? And what do you think that the sequels went on to do better than this one? Because I definitely am looking forward to reviewing the sequels in the future too. And hey, like I said at the beginning, if you are a fan of the channel, if you support this, even if you're already subscribed, please consider actually clicking the bell to be notified when we upload. It helps me out so much. It helps videos gain traction. It helps us grow on the channel. And you know, we're growing our community one little bit at a time. Check out the Reddit in the description down below, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay awesome, everybody.